Excuse me, can I have your attention, please? Can I ask you, please, to move a bit forward? Can I ask the panelists to join me on the panel so that we can start? Can you move forward a bit so that we can allow people once they come in? We're planning to get ready, go live in the next 2, 3, 4 minutes. Gonzalo, your seat is waiting for you. Gonzalo, your seat is waiting for you. I think we should be ready. Allez-y. If you want to come closer. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy that you join us today in this panel discussion. Before we jump into the discussion with our panelists, let me give the floor first to Adeline for a short welcoming note.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EvalPartners session on 4 years into the 2030 agenda, capturing the learning from the VNR process and exploring the progress in building national evaluation capacities. We are really grateful that you could make it. Besides competing, events that are taking place all over, and, I want to thank you for coming, and I want to thank our panelists for availing themselves, and Kassam, who's moderating the discussion, who will introduce the panelists once I finish welcoming you. Just for those who are not aware of who EvalPartners are and what we are all about, I'll just give you a brief background. I won't be long. So in March 2012, the IOC and UNICEF and some partners, major partners came together and launched EvalPartners. It is an innovative partnership to enhance the capacities of civil society, organizations in general, voluntary organizations for, voluntary organizations for professional evaluation in particular, which we call evaluation networks, and to influence policymakers, public opinion, and other key stakeholders so that public policies are based on evidence and incorporate considerations of equity and effectiveness. And you will notice that we have a focus really on using evidence in making policy decisions, in making any important decision. It's important to use evidence. So the work of EvalPartners has contributed in shaping the international agenda for addressing the challenges in evaluation and in assisting the evaluation profession to take a more global approach in addressing world problems. So, for example, the first global forum that EvalPartners held witnessed the launch of EvalPartners in Chiang Mai in Thailand in 2012. And this harnessed the global advocacy outreach efforts that culminated in the declaration of 2015 as the year of evaluation. And through 100+ events that were held throughout the world, under the Eval Year banner, a global evaluation agenda 2016 to 2020 was developed and launched in the second Global Evaluation Forum in Nepal in 2015. The Eval Agenda, as we call it, Eval Agenda 2020, aims to strengthen the enabling environment for evaluation. as you may agree with me, the enabling environment is key for any country to institutionalize evaluation. We also, it aims to develop institutional capacities, to build individual capacities for evaluation, focusing on, evaluators, commissioners, users of evaluation, among others. So we are looking at the whole evaluation ecosystem. And the fourth, aim is to support the interlinkages among the first three dimensions that I mentioned above. So currently, EvalPartners is made up of 5 networks. We have Eval SDGs, and I'm sure some of you attended the session side event that was held by Eval SDGs last week on powering for success, inclusive and dynamic country-led evaluations. And also just to say that Eval SDGs will be hosting another event, during this high-level political forum this week on Wednesday, on evaluation to connect the SDGs with national priorities, learning from Finland and Nigeria, which you are all invited to. So please mark the date on Wednesday, same time. So the other networks that are part of EvalPartners are Eval SDGs, Eval Youth, Eval Indigenous, and the Global Parliamentary Forum for Evaluation. So these networks comprise of professionals with commitments to evaluation, who are engaged in promotion and practice of evaluation throughout the world. So EvalPartners has been implementing a project on strengthening national evaluation systems. And this project is to cover 16 countries. And currently we have what we call 8 focus countries. And Kasim will talk about these countries. And by 2020, we'll have 16 focus countries. So one of the reasons that we are hosting this event is to just share with you and discuss some of the ways that the countries and the panelists here are strengthening their national evaluation capacities, and our contribution as EvalPartners in strengthening the national evaluation capacities. So Kasim will moderate the discussion, and he will introduce our panelists. Thank you, Kasim.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Quickly, let me introduce to you the panelists. We have in front of you now Gonzalo Hernandez Licona. Gonzalo is the Director of the National Council for Evaluation and Social Development Policy in Mexico. He's the board member of the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, 3IE, as you all know it. A board member of El Colegio de Mexico and member of the evaluation community of Gavi Alliance, and he teaches, in addition to that, development economics at ITAM in Mexico since 1991. Second, on the panel, we have Ziad Abdel Samad. Ziad Abdel Samad is the Executive Director of the Arab NGO Network for Development, ANND, if you ever heard of it, and I'm pretty sure that it resonates. He's been on board since 1991, leading this regional network that is based in Beirut, and the network brings 30 NGO and 9 regional network under it from 10 different countries in MENA. He's active and has a leading role in various monitoring electoral reforms in the region for a long time, and he's active on various global networks and initiatives, Social Watch, Civicus, CPDE, among others, and lately he contributed to the Spotlight report that has been shared among the crowd by emails and social media. I'm happy also for us to have with us Bernard Rhodes. Bernard is the first director for the new results management and aid effectiveness division at the World Bank, recognized as the strategy, policy and review department at the Asian Development Bank. I mean, banks, we're all confused with banks, so I apologize for that. And he is responsible for the ADB corporate results management approach, implemented throughout their different initiatives worldwide or in the region. Bernard is a globally recognized expert in result-based management for the last 30 years probably. He has done great job in different parts of the world in more than 30 countries, and before joining ADB, he was partner at Gus Guillory Incorporation and Management Consulting based in Canada. I'm happy that we have also with us Marceline Cissé, and he came all the way from Cote d'Ivoire as part of the delegation of Cote d'Ivoire. Marceline is the general, he's part, and he's heading the General Directorate for Aid Strategy and Coordination Office at the Ministry of Planning and Development in Cote d'Ivoire. And I mean, we're very glad that he made it to us to share with us the perspectives from government as well as covering a region perspective. And finally, last but not least, our colleague Saule Khamzina. Saule is an independent evaluator and researcher, and she's a co-founder of the National Monitoring and Evaluation Network in Kyrgyzstan. And she's been part of the first cohort of practical evaluators and CIS region. Saule has worked with many clients, and she represents the VOPE in the Coordination Council for Eurasia Alliance of National Evaluation Associations. And currently, she's the Eurasia Alliance on the National Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation IOCE boards. I'm very honored to have this crowd of panelists on the panel. And let me immediately, without any further delay, jump into probably a question, raising the question that's, that resonates in the back of our mind always. And let me start probably by Gonzalo. And the question basically, Gonzalo, is the following. I think, I mean, throughout the various engagement that we had over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of evolution and development and the progress and the steps towards strengthening national capacity at the national and regional level within the government and with other actors. What are these steps? I mean, how can you, what can you see about the state of play on these evaluation capacity? Can you define that? Give us draw a picture of these in Mexico and probably in the region? In general, yeah.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kasem, and thank you very much for all of you to be here. I think it's a very interesting panel. So what I believe, witnessing what is happening in Mexico and witnessing what is happening in other parts of the world, is that yes, we do have a kind of enthusiastic governments about the Agenda 2030. They know, governments know they are enthusiastic, or sometimes they know they have to do something about it. So we can see changes in documents and alignment to public programs towards the agenda. We can see VNRs, which are self-reviews of what government is trying to do. And we have various examples. So we can have, for instance, I mean, Finland is a great example. Always is a good example, Finland, of the evaluation processes they are having. Yep. We were lucky to be there, some of us in Finland, and they explained to us what they are doing in terms of implementation and in terms of evaluation. And I think that's very important, because I believe that as soon as it is clear for countries / governments, it's not the same, I know, but when it's clear this. Somehow the implementation process, then the evaluation process is clearer. From my point of view, the lack in certain countries, many countries, of the evaluation process as it happens in Finland and Nigeria perhaps, and it's because the implementation process is not that clear, okay. And therefore the evaluation doesn't go that well. So in Finland you have good examples. In Fiji, we have significant funding has been committed towards monitoring and evaluation. In the UK, the following up is there. In Nigeria, there are very good examples of not only prioritizing goals, but also they are engaged in some elements of evaluation. In the Mexican case, I mean, the story is quite mixed. Governments, because now we have a new government, have been trying to address SDGs. I don't know if the implementation is quite clear for the government. Nevertheless, from Carnival's point of view, we've been pushing that since poverty and multidimensional poverty is still a very important goal for the agenda. When you address a multidimensional poverty indicator, at the same time you are getting some priorities for countries, and you are addressing other goals, and therefore the evaluation and the monitoring of that process may be interesting. In Oaxaca, which is a state in Mexico, a poor state in Mexico, they are doing something about monitoring and a bit of evaluation. So there are things around. However, as I said before, I really believe that we have to go further in terms of evaluation. And I still believe, as I said before, that when the implementation is not that clear, and we have to be, I mean, very aware that the implementation is not that clear. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's either how can we choose priorities? And tomorrow we'll see an example of Finland and Nigeria. It will be interesting. How do you choose priorities? Governments sometimes are aware that they should follow the whole agenda at the same time. But it's quite difficult to accommodate everything, the agenda, the national priorities. And so how do you go on the implementation? What about the interactions that in our group with EVA, the Global Development Sustainable Report, which is coming very soon, is just out there. We are really concerned about the interactions, because it is quite common that countries may go just to follow single indicators, yep, and not addressing the interactions. And therefore, we can do much better in terms of evaluation if we do that. In Finland, they follow some interesting evaluation questions. And I think these type of questions should be followed in almost every country if we really want to address the evaluation process. Let me give you some examples, taking example from Finland, another example of evaluation questions that I think that they should be there somewhere. So a question for governments and countries at this very moment. Has the understanding of development changed in your country because of the 2030 agenda? What happened in terms of development in your country because of the agenda? Are you changing something? Or are you just doing the same thing and then you just align programs and say, well, yes, all my programs, the old programs, yep, are there because of the agenda? Stop me, please, when you... Yep,
probably in 1 minute, probably.
Yep. How were national priorities aligned with the 2030 agenda? What is the long-term view on sustainable development because of the agenda in your country? What trade-offs, interactions were analyzed by policymakers when addressing the agenda? What specific public policy was set in motion to leave no one behind, mm-hmm, because of the agenda? So there are various questions that I don't think the evaluation process is still there in many countries. And it will be great to have this type of answers for many countries, for many governments, in order to improve the evaluation process.
Probably building on that, Gonzalo, and getting into the question of the government, let me flip the question to Marcel and ask him the question: what, from your perspective, what have the government done over the last 4 years to build that capacity and probably answer these questions?
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm glad to be here, although it is the panel is in English. I will try my best. From our perspective, let's say that Cote d'Ivoire has taken some transformative action in encouraging the MNE, the evaluation in the new constitution. I think this is one of the key transformative actions we have taken. Before the new constitution, it was not included in the constitution. I think this is one of the key transformative actions we have taken. The second action I can also talk about is the preparation in conjunction with the National Development Plan. We have elaborated a national monitoring and evaluation action plan. I'm glad to have Madame here. We also organized in Cote d'Ivoire some months ago an international forum on evaluation. We also try to build the capacities of all the stakeholders in order to streamline the M&E the evaluation within at national level, at sectoral level, included at local level. I think this is one of the key actions we have taken. And one key fundamental action we have taken is also the reinforcement of the national statistical system. You know, you cannot build an M&E system without statistics. I think the statistic is one of the key elements. We are embarking reorganizing the national statistics system, including human resources at national level, at local level, included at grassroots level. What I can also stress out here is also the importance of all the actors, including the civil society. During the preparation of the Vienna, we conducted a participatory process, and the civil society has played a critical role in supporting the government. I think it is one critical point because they need to play a fundamental role, including the awareness of all the stakeholders in following all the indicators. But one critical gap, we have a capacity gap, including at the government public sector level, at the parliamentary level, at civil society level, because we need to build the capacities. I think we have some human capacity gap. This is critical. We have also some funding, financial gap also, because if you know to produce some data, you know you need a lot of resources to collect and produce disaggregated and update data. I think this is also one of the critical challenge we are facing. I think from our perspective, this is some key points I want to stress out. I think I can still point out some points in the course of the discussion.
Thank you so much for that. Let me pick up on the question of relate the question to Ziad and ask him, is there a capacity gap in the first place? The example of countries that have institutionalized or constitutionalized the evaluation and the policy, is that enough? What's your perspective from a civil society? What is the input from a civil society perspective?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Let me start by saying that if we are talking about the Agenda 2030 and we are talking about the SDGs, we had during the negotiations and discussions or during the post 2015 agenda, etc., a long debate whether we will have kind of a monitoring and evaluation mechanism or process, and we ended up by adopting kind of a follow-up and review, which is a very light and a very soft, because we've been trying to avoid kind of an in-depth or a serious evaluation and assessment and monitoring to hold, let's say, the governments accountable for their commitments. So this is the starting point where I want to start, because if you are talking about there is a big difference between the concept of follow-up and review and monitoring and evaluation. So this is one. Second, at the national level, I believe that there is a need to adopt kind of a multi-stakeholder processes would it be bodies, institutions, councils, coordination, whatsoever, but multi-stakeholder, where the different stakeholders should be participating. For the time being, what we saw in terms of implementing the VNRs and the whole implementation of the SDGs is kind of a coordination mechanism to produce a report. But this coordination mechanism is not going beyond this coordination in order to really play a role or being a real element in governing, let's say, the implementation and to monitor, let's say, and assess the implementation and the commitment. And when we are talking about the multi-stakeholder mechanism, also we need to talk about transparency. And we need to talk about access to information. So these are issues that we need to monitor and to see whether we are really committed to transparency and access to information. And if you are talking about the multi-stakeholder means an active participation of civil society. While, at least in our region, the more we have commitments to the Agenda 2030, the more we have a shrinking space for civil society, and the enabling environment is changing. So how you can invite civil society to really participate in this process while you are not allowing or restricting civil society, not only restricting information, but also restricting the ability of civil society to independently be active. And third element of the multi-stakeholder, the most important, when you're talking about the implementation of the agenda, you are talking about the implementation of the policies, Parliament should play a very important role. Yep. Until now, Parliament, they are not. I mean, we don't feel that the Parliaments are really engaged in the whole, in this whole process.
Yeah, I think that's very, very pertinent to the discussion, and probably picking up on from the national situation to going a bit into a regional perspective. Let me pick up on the discussion on the capacities available at the region and the role of development partners, and probably ask Bernard, what has the development actors have done in terms of building that capacity, or probably supporting national efforts, being them at the government or non-government level, from experience in the region and reflection to the outside world?
Great. Thank you, Kasim, and thank you to EvalPartners and also Dorothy Lux for getting me involved in this. So maybe I'll just start with a little bit of scene setting about what the state of SDG monitoring is like in Asia and the Pacific. Generally, it's the story of a lack of data availability. And let me give you four not so heartwarming points about what the problems are. So we have a partnership with the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. We've done a study with them. 10 out of the 17 SDGs lack data. So that means about 149 out of the 232 indicators don't have data for Asia and the Pacific. And to make matters worse, collection is unequal. So when you look at which SDGs are being measured, environment SDGs are really undermeasured. So only 40% have of the environment-related indicators have data. There's a lot more data collected for economic and social indicators. Then with UN Women, we did a study on gender indicators. So out of the 232, we looked at 85 indicators that are directly or indirectly linked to gender equality. And our yardstick for deciding data is if 2/3 of the countries have the data. Only 26% of those 85 indicators have data from 2/3 of our member countries. And shockingly, 41% of those indicators, almost half, have no data at all. Wow. So even though we have the SDGs, we have the targets, we have the indicators, it's a nice framework. When you look at the data availability, the picture is pretty bleak. We're partnering with UNDP to do something we're calling SDG snapshots. So this is going down to the country level and looking at what is being done in particular countries. We've just about finished Cambodia, Nepal, and Armenia. and seeing major gaps in data availability, data quality, and disaggregation. And then when you talk to national bureaus of statistics, you see the issues they're struggling with in terms of prioritizing which indicators to measure, and sometimes resistance in measuring the SDGs. So I think we need to bear in mind many countries don't have the resources to do all of the indicators. They have to choose which ones are going to be the priority for their country or government. And because the SDGs are a political framework, it means that sometimes the most important indicators aren't necessarily included. So if you look at climate, many SDG indicators don't reflect CO2 emissions and such. So we also see some resistance in measuring SDGs. Let me then just end by talking about 4 positive things that are happening. So one is we're working with national bureaus of statistics on data collection. And one of the things we're doing is trying to bring them forwards in terms of technology using iPads. So sounds basic, but moving away from paper-based questionnaires and data collection to doing things on mobile devices could be a huge game changer for data collection. Then looking at the role of big data and satellite imagery. So in northern Philippines, for example, we've analyzed the growth in cell phone traffic and nighttime illumination to look at economic development. So maybe some things we can measure through using big data and satellite imagery in innovative ways. Then, of course, I'm representing management. I'm sitting on the other side of the table from our evaluation colleagues. Maybe they should be the ones here today, but anyway. So they're working. They have a very strong focus on evaluation capacity building with our member countries, and are working on a study with UNICEF doing an assessment of an evaluation capacity across Asia and the Pacific. And then just to end by saying the data that we do have, so we have a partnership with UNDP and ESCAP, and we have an SDG data portal, so that's at data.unescap.org, and that has basically as much data that we do have for the SDGs we have up on the web, and you can go through and download or looking at different customized representations. So maybe I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I think, I mean, to the extent that data is lacking and the importance of having data, but I think, a couple of literature and a couple of the policy briefs that the evaluation committee has been producing calls for the fact that data is not enough by itself. Let's look at the complemented with other perspective, more evaluative perspective. And in this regard, let me pick up the mind of our colleague from the evaluation community, Saule, and see in terms of the capacity on the evaluation capacity, how do you see it both from the supply side and given your interaction with at the government level, at the national level with government counterparts, what's the picture there in Kyrgyzstan and the region, CIS region?
Thank you, Qasim. Yes, I represent a voluntary organization of professional in evaluation, and that's why from this perspective, I think that one of the important point, it was already expressed here about partnership, because what we have in case of Kyrgyzstan and the regional levels, that we try to build this partnership first to promote evaluation as an instrument for better achievement of SDG. And in this case, this partnership, it's very important to have like this balance between what capacity needed from evaluator as a professional and what is the expectation from them from government level. And I would say that capacity, evaluation capacity, Dorothy today said that it's not national evaluation capacity, it's not just evaluation capacity. It is, that's why I think that it's important that VOPES on national and regional level, we are working very close to create environment to enable an environment for evaluation, and we work very closely with Parliament, with government to create understanding of evaluation. So it is not only, again, capacity in evaluation, it is also better understanding our role of evaluation and the role of quality of true and qualitative data, and also about how decision will be made and based on this data. And here I think that one gap is with data, and it was already expressed, and it is the same in our country and regional level, because not providing data according indicator it's important, and it's one of the gap. But also I think that one of the gap is that how government, Parliament is understand role of evaluation, not just monitoring and not just collecting data, but also how evaluation, what is the role of evaluation in this process. And when we start talking about evaluation, we are thinking about professional evaluators and their capacity. So far, I should say that we have more process of monitoring and evaluation system and understanding of this process is mostly focused on monitoring rather than an evaluation. And I think that this is one of the gap, and this is the next step where we think that we should, as a professional evaluators, work and help to create this better understanding.
Thank you, Saule. Allow me to shift the discussion a bit into another dimension and share with you some of the highlights of the work that the EvalPartners have done in a couple of minutes before getting back into a discussion. And I think I'd like to share with you the work that has been done by EvalPartner to support and to strengthen national evaluation capacity and policies in some part of the world, and to push forward and support the multi-stakeholder partnerships. That work has been done in the context of gearing towards renewing commitment for evaluation by the year 2020, and hopefully doing some of these commitments being renewed. Quickly, the work has been focused to a large extent on strengthening the national capacities, evaluation capacity in these countries, and that's built on the picking up on the lack of data, picking up on the understanding and expectations of the national counterparts, understand differentiation between monitoring and evaluation, and then pushing forward and trying to support multi-stakeholder platforms and perspective, and this is what we're trying to do, and that is part of our discussion today, to pick up on that element, and with the hope of further integrating the evaluation dimension within the reviews of the national development plans, as well as the VNR as a process, while considering that this process is both developmental as well as a policy, a political process. Grosso modo, there has been a couple of interventions, as you see, in several parts of the world, covering almost different regions, and hopefully with the next phase we're going to move into new territories. We had quite a challenging as well as promising findings, but quickly, if I can pick up on some of the quick findings, I would say that in some part, like for example in Nepal, there has been quite an extensive multi-stakeholder engagement, despite the fact that there has been so far restrictions from the government side on the CSO life and work. And from a capacity perspective and from a system perspective, this multi-stakeholder group has pushed forward a bill for the government to endorse, a bill for monitoring and evaluation. But still, there is room for a huge amount of work, and the community authority there is embarking into series of capacity assessment of the national, both government and non-governmental capacities. Moving a bit down to no, leave the, if you don't mind. Moving a bit down into Senegal, I think in Senegal, with the efforts to strengthen the institutionalization of the evaluation policy, there has been a huge effort to draft a policy, an evaluation policy, put it at the government on the government table, and now the discussion is being taken within the a multi-stakeholder kind of a forum to endorse that and adopt it. Moving a bit into down further south into Zimbabwe, I mean we've all have celebrated, or if not, I mean this is news for some of us here, that our colleagues in Zimbabwe have celebrated the week of evaluation in March, and that was a huge opportunity not only to raise awareness but rather also to push the non-converters on one hand, the government counterparts and other actors into the scene, and the intention, one of the intentions to bring the, picking up on Ziad's note, probably to bring in the parliamentarian on board is to establish a parliamentary caucus to push forward the evaluation monitoring agenda. If we go a bit up north straight to Kyrgyzstan, building on Saule's perspective, I think there has been a huge effort also to build on the existing parliamentarian efforts. There is, I mean, sensibility there on parliamentarian, and with the efforts done through the Forum of Parliamentarian, among others, a decrease is being drafted pending approvals, and with the intention basically is that these decrees and the evaluation policy would be a cornerstone to push forward and support any further capacity building. If we go a bit down south to Indonesia, the efforts there is being around has been done bilaterally and with wider multi-stakeholder, and the government is getting on board. I mean, we have to bear in mind also that this whole process of influencing policy is a bit of a long-term process. It's a bumpy process, and this is why we're convening here to discuss what would be the challenges, and we got a couple of them, and hopefully we gonna discuss in a while some aspects that has to do with the inclusion dimension. And if we go a bit to the middle of the globe, I think in Jordan, again there has been efforts supported by EvalPartners to convene and to discuss around the evaluation. How can we put forward an action plan to craft an evaluation policy to support the government in its work? I think, I mean, this would on one hand give us an indication of the efforts all around the globe, not only supported by EvalPartners, it's supported by EvalPartners and the funders behind them, but definitely by all the development actors on the table. And we've had a discussion by Bernard in this regard in the Pacific. From there, let's gear the discussion into how inclusive is the review process, both of the national development agenda on one hand and the SDG. And I'll pick up immediately on Ziad and throw that question to you. How inclusive is these processes, globally and nationally?
I already answered when I said about the shrinking space, but let me it's on?
Yeah.
Let me comment, react a little bit, and this can help a little bit in my answer. First, we are talking about VNRs. We are talking about reports. We are not talking about policies. And if you ask me about our experience, I will tell you, VNRs are often very nice documents. And there are a lot maybe of commitments or recommendations whatsoever. But the reality is not there. Which means that when you are talking about evaluation or whatsoever, you are not, I don't mean capacity or finance, I look for the political will. Is there a real political will? When you have a political will, then you can find the capacity, then you can find the funding, then you can find the. So the issue is that talking about you've been helping Jordan, and Jordan presented first. It conducted a very, let's say, inclusive process in producing the VNR. And then you've been talking about supporting the capacities of the government in order to see how we can proceed with the process. But few months after the adoption of the VNR and presenting the VNR in the high-level political forum, a new tax law was issued, which is totally in contradiction with the commitments of the VNR. A new social protection system, and yesterday they were putting more restriction on the funding of civil society. So what does it mean? I mean, if you have the VNR and then you are focusing on the whole process, and at the same time you don't see any political will. That's why it's not about capacities,
Yep.
It's about the political will.
Yep.
Let me go to the regional dimension. I don't want to go to the global because everybody knows, and we have all comments on the whole marketplace that you are creating here in this place. But the regional, at least from our let's say experience, the regional is a very important level where there is it can create a space for the governments to interact with a kind of a multi-stakeholder debate and discussion. Governments in the same region, they can challenge each other, but they can help each other. They can complement each other because, I mean, the regional integration is part of the whole the development process.
Yep.
So that's why I think that when we are talking about also the SDG process and the Agenda 2030, it is national, definitely. It's a national agenda, but the regional dimension is very important in order to support the national processes. So this is.
Thank you so much. Probably immediately to Bernard, you've laid down a nice picture about the challenges on the data, but building on what Ziad has said, is the region a platform, a space for countries to challenge as well as to complement themselves from your perspective?
So I think there's two trends which I would highlight. So one, I think there's varying levels of commitment from governments. So maybe to highlight, for example, Indonesia, where we see a high level of commitment to delivering on the SDGs. So they have a very, the location of the responsibility for the SDGs is quite central in their planning and financing. They're setting up something called SDG 1, which is a public-private partnership fund for funding SDG projects. And I think you can see the kind of national level commitment to pushing forwards with the SDGs. So I'd say those are the kind of positive things countries like Indonesia, which are pushing forwards. On the not so positive, some of the research we did on our last SDG report with UNESCAP and UNDP showed shrinking space in Asia and the Pacific for citizen engagement. So maybe the same kind of phenomena. So that would lead to less inclusion, less involvement of civil society or organizations. So I think there's maybe multiple things going on, and those would be two of the trends that I would highlight. Kind of increased commitment from some governments, but generally at the regional level, less inclusivity and shrinking space for citizens and CSOs.
Appreciated. Probably the question to Marceline. You've highlighted the role of CSO, but practically speaking, what do you expect from them as government? I mean, here on the table, we're hearing voices, and I'm pretty sure that also, I mean, back in Cote d'Ivoire, you're hearing either voices that echo or supplement or complement these. So what do you expect? What do you see any, I mean, what do you expect from the civil society and other actors to bring to the table?
Thanks so much. Before responding to this question, I want to take the example of Senegal. I want to stress out that also in Cote d'Ivoire, we are developing a national development evaluation policy. I think this is one of the key elements to institutionalize the M&E system in Cote d'Ivoire. Also in Cote d'Ivoire, we also have a section of a parliamentary network for evaluation in Cote d'Ivoire. It is important to stress out this point. We also have an Eval women strategy in Cote d'Ivoire. We also have some different initiatives. We have a Cote d'Ivoire Evaluation Initiative Network. We are also embarked in several initiatives at the regional level.
Yep.
I think it's important to stress out this point. There's also a key point I want for the streamlining the M&E system, where the government designates some director of planning and statistics in each line ministry. I think it is important to point out these points. And for the implication of civil society, it's important for the civil society to support the government for raising awareness for the domestication appropriation of this initiative. I think this is one of the key points when we think that the civil society can play a critical role. When we are preparing the VNR, I'm glad to announce that we have some representative of the civil society here in this room. They play a critical role. They have a national consultative on the SDGs at national level, also at local level. I think one of the key points we can also stress out is how we can localize the SDGs, and the civil society can play a critical role in raising awareness at national level, at grassroots level. But I must admit it, we still have some gap capacity. We need to institutionalize, to formalize the dialogue between the civil society and the government. If there is no regulatory framework, I think we cannot move forward. I think this is important. There are some gap capacity. The civil society, they don't have sometimes some capacity to point out the point of view. It's important to build capacity. They lack funding because they don't have resources to participate actively in the dialogue with the government. We need to find some way to fund the civil society. But I want to stress that if the government is funding the civil society, there should be a gap there because we want them to play their role independently.
Yep. Yep.
I think these are some key points I want to point out here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, getting into the flow and back to Gonzalo, civil society and creating or formalizing a dialogue. And then a while ago, we talked that the VNR as document is crystallized, but then what about the process? How can we improve the role and probably give a better role for civil society into the review as a process, not only a document?
Kasem, what I would say is that the importance of civil society in general should be quite strong, but specifically on the evaluation process should be very, very important, irrespective of the agenda. So what I believe is that civil society should push for strengthening the evaluation processes in every country, because then the learning and accountability that comes with evaluation should be there. The institutionalization of evaluation should be there.
Yep.
The transparency, as you were saying, should be there. I think that if countries had a strong evaluation capacity within the country, then VNRs will be challenged. It won't be just very nice documents which governments say, well, we're doing this and that. No, VNRs should be challenged. I think government documents should be challenged. I think government should be challenged in democracy, and this comes precisely from civil society and sometimes through the evaluation process. So I really believe that irrespective of the agenda, if you really would like to have more responsible governments in terms of sustainable development, evaluation capacity should be there, and therefore the push from the civil society is always very, very important. So as you were saying, our VNRs, I mean, it's all right that we have already VNRs where governments are willing to produce, that's fine, but we really believe that we have to go further from that. So we should have documents with more evaluation elements, with more peer elements, not only a nice document from governments. So we really have to be present, pushing the government towards development. And I would like to just mention briefly, again, our Global Development Sustainable Report that we are producing right now, 19, where we are aware of various things. There are things that we should be addressing at the very moment. The increase in inequality, climate change, biodiversity loss, increase of e-waste, the maternal mortality goals will not be there perhaps met, malnutrition, both in undernutrition and obesity, and then all these elements of interactions that we mentioned before. I mean, interactions are not that easy to implement. So we are proposing in our group, like examples of groups of elements that can take together. And so, for instance, in human well-being and capabilities, sustainable economies, energy decarbonization and access, food and nutrition, urban and peri-urban development, and global commons, we can have those examples where we should be having different types of levers of groups that can help on that interaction in terms of governance, economy and finance, behavior and collective action, and science and technology. If we can address some of those elements, not the whole agenda at the same time, but some examples of that, then we'll be pushing for more responsible governments, and we may address the agenda in a better, and we'll have a better agenda in shape in the near future.
Let me go finally to Saule, and I mean, from this scan of probably the learnings that we've accumulated over the last 4 years from the process, what can you share from the example, from the experience of CIS and Kyrgyzstan? Again, from an evaluation perspective, you're coming, I mean, the nice thing about this panel is that it's really a multi-stakeholder panel. It brings different voices, and your evaluation voice is there.
Thank you. I would say that these 4 years, it's different processes are going, and different processes in different countries, of CIS countries. So, for example, we have Tajikistan, which have been VNR prepared and presented VNR twice, and we have, for example, Kazakhstan, which is presenting this year, and Kyrgyzstan, we're going to do that the next year, hopefully. So, and situation is different in different countries, but I can say that from our perspective, it is this process of development, process of not just like a VNR preparing like political document, but it's development process, and inclusiveness of this process is a key issue and key principles, and thank you for bringing it for this discussion. And that's why I think that openness and partnership and involvement of civic society, VOPES, is very important in our cases. And we have this two-side movement, let's say. It is not just expectation to VOPES or from a government or back. It is both direction movement. And this is, I think that this is one of their step and best results for this year's understanding that it is not, this process should be inclusive, and that role of their VOPEs and role of civic societies, it's growing. And I think that this is one of their lessons learned.
Thank you so much. Let me give the floor the chance to react. I mean, we want to have this discussion a bit lively also with the floor. So let's spare the next half an hour on a bit of reflection from the floor, if not the questions or comments or reflection. You don't have to address them precisely to a panelist, but if you have anything special, specific to each of them, feel free to. I'll try to collect a couple of them, 3-4 of them, address them, and then we go into another role of discussion. We start Marie-Hélène we have, and then the lady behind her, and then the two ladies here. Okay.
Thank you very much. 4 years into the 2030 agenda, and based on your...
Would you present yourself and...
Yes. Marie-Hélène Adrien from Universalia and from Ideas. 4 years into the 2030 agenda, and from your different perspectives, if you were to rate on a 1 to 10 your level of comfort in our ability to measure the SDGs, what would that be? And what would be the one accelerator that you think should be really worked on? Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies behind you.
Moi, je suis Madame Gogoa Rachel, je suis de la société civile, je suis de la Côte d'Ivoire.
Don't worry, I will do the translation in a while. Go ahead, ma'am. Continue, s'il vous plaît.
Bon, d'accord. Donc, je salue l'avènement de ce panel. Je pense qu'il est bien à propos. Mais je me dis que c'est bien de faire ce panel. Mais il y a une série de choses à faire. Quand je prends les ODD, pour faire une évaluation, il faudrait avoir une situation de référence. Ce qui suppose avoir des données statistiques. Ce qui veut dire qu'au moment où on avait adopté les ODD en septembre 2015, chaque État parti devait faire l'état des lieux dans les différents domaines concernés ou les secteurs concernés, pour avoir la situation de référence. Et à l'issue de cette situation de référence, comme certains pays l'ont fait, avoir un comité national de mise en œuvre qui lui-même est accompagné d'un plan opérationnel de mise en œuvre où la responsabilisation de chaque acteur ressort clairement et les indicateurs, les cibles, tout est clair. À partir de cet instant-là, c'est plus facile de faire une évaluation de mise en œuvre. Mais sans rien au départ, comment peut-on faire une évaluation de mise en œuvre? Ça, c'est un autre élément. L'autre élément, c'est la disposition dans les pays d'une culture d'évaluation. Est-ce qu'on a la culture d'évaluation? Ça veut dire que, est-ce que tout ce qu'on fait là, on veut savoir où on va, on veut mesurer les progrès, on veut mesurer les changements? Il faut que cela fasse partie de notre fonctionnement. Or, quand on n'a pas la culture d'évaluation, bon, on se lève, on travaille, on dit on avance, comment, sur quelle base, c'est quoi on a changé. Donc, ça, c'est... Mais il faut aussi dire que et les statistiques et l'évaluation ont un coût. Ont un coût.
Merci.
Alors, je serais heureuse, que l'UNICEF, que je connais très bien, parce que c'est un partenaire de très longue date, s'engage véritablement. Pas seulement les statistiques des enfants, mais les statistiques dans l'ensemble. Et comme vous le savez aussi bien que moi, les 17 ODD sont interreliés. Et vous ne pouvez pas parler d'un enfant, c'est comme la poule.
Bien sûr, oui.
La poule et le coq.
Et l'œuf, peut-être.
Il n'y a pas de coq Il n'y a pas de poussin s'il n'y a pas coq. Il n'y a pas de poussin s'il n'y a pas poule.
Merci beaucoup,
Donc,
Madame Rachel.
voilà, merci.
Merci. Quickly, before I give the floor to our two colleagues here, and allow me, ma'am, for the second round, but to translate the question, if I can get it, it's two comments. One on the baseline, whether we had a baseline since 2015 as a reference point on which we can build and base our evaluation for the future. And Madame Rachel thinks that it might be a lost opportunity in this regard. And the second, and accordingly, since we lost that, how are we setting the indicators that would allow for an evaluation? And the second element has to do with questioning whether we do have an evaluation culture per se in the country, and from that raising the question: do we know how and what? And what can we use this evaluation? We're doing these statistics and evaluation, but do we know how are we using them for, and what are we using them for? Apologies if I misinterpret, but I think I covered that. Thank you. Probably, yeah. I forgot that. And the third question, the comment was on the funding and the cost of the evaluation. Allow me to get another two questions from here, and then probably Josephine, she has. Oh.
Thank you very much, and to our panelists, it's been a great interaction. My name is Josephine Watera. I head the M&E division in the Parliament of Uganda, and I sit on the board of ideas. I'm honored to be here because when the discussion touched Parliament, I said, there we go. And I thought that this is actually one of those areas that we need to address most, because when evaluation is finally done by the technocrats, then there's someone who's supposed to take decisions on what has come from these evaluations. So from Bernard, I don't know how you're engaging, considering that you are at a point where we have the regional networks for parliaments, how you're engaging with them directly, the platform and forum for parliamentarians in Asia. Secondly, it's about issues of mindset. And when I had experiences being shared about the different countries by EvalPartners side, I thought mindset, like when you hear us talking about money, when you look at SDGs, it's just making us to do things better. It's not like we are talking something new, but it's more about you've been using a fork, can you now use a spoon to eat better, to drink better, your soup, something like that. So it's about doing things better. It's not a new thing. But the mindset, and that's why we need to address it very quickly. If people start thinking that it's something different, then we'll start saying we don't have money. But our ministries and government departments have always been implementing health projects, road infrastructure, education. So it is that within that very budget, within those very finances, that we want to do better. So if we can address mindset as early as now, it will help us to move better, so that people don't think that we're talking something different. It's the same thing, but we just want to do it in a better way. Lastly, it's about language. What we have done in Uganda, we have translated the 17 SDGs in, I think now we have 6 languages, because there are countries that are so dynamic in terms of languages, so that every person, every community gets to understand what the 17 goals are about, so that in future, when now we want to do our evaluations, people have the capacity to actually understand what we're talking about, so that we move it from English and take it down to other languages, have SDGs in French, in Spanish, in all those local languages that operate within our countries. I'm almost there. The last one is about carrot and stick. Just this one, I'm going to be quick. Carrot and stick. Okay. So what we have done as a country, we have the Minister of Finance issues what we call a certificate of compliance to gender and equity. So if this certificate of compliance has not, if you don't pass the test, we have even actually set like a pass mark of 60%. So if the National Planning Authority does evaluation of your budget and they feel it's not responding to gender and equity, you fail the tests, the parliament can't pass your budget. It comes to parliament, the budget has to come to parliament with that gender certificate. So it's more of a carrot and stick approach. So I just want to know from our panelists, is this good? Is it okay as early as now to apply carrot and stick? Thank you.
Let's see if somebody from the panelists will be able to address this policy measure, the carrots and stick. Let me turn to our panelists, and Ali Gonzalo.
So this judge will give 5 to the implementation process. This is 5, but I'm taking out of 10.
Mike.
So you asked about number. So
this judge applies a 5. So we are enthusiastic about the agenda. That's good. We understand that we want to do things better, but we have so many challenges, because if we stick doing the same things that we've done over the past 4 years, 5 years, then many of the targets we won't meet them in the next 10 years. Therefore, we need a possible question about carrots and sticks is perhaps more accountability addressed to countries and governments again. I think challenging countries a bit will be important. I will like VNRs because it's a country willing to participate, but if we challenge them a bit, then if we challenge them in few aspects, I would say I would go for leave no one behind, I would go for poverty, I would go for climate change, I would go for certain interactions which are not easy, such as growth against climate change. If we just push governments a bit on those aspects, not 169 targets at the same time, because that doesn't make sense for carrots and sticks. But if we just challenge countries and VNRs for certain elements, I think if we have that, then we may have an 8.
I see Bernard has another rating. I was sneaking a bit, but let me. I will get back to you, Ziad. But Bernard, in addition to that, I want you also to address Madame Rachel's comment on the indicators and reference, because you're working on that now in the region.
Yeah, so I give a 3. Maybe I'm too pessimistic today, I don't know. And then the accelerator question, I was really struggling with this. I think it's one of 2 things. On one hand, I think it's technology. As I mentioned, mobile devices, big data, satellite imagery. But that can often be seen as a panacea. Technology will come in and solve all our problems, which is not true. So the other thing I was thinking was help with prioritization. Because again, many countries, they just have to make choices. They can't do 232 indicators. Which ones should they work on collecting and why? So, Madame, your question, absolutely we don't have baselines. So if you look at the SDG indicators, I think about a third actually don't have an agreed methodology yet. So no methodology means no consistent data collection, which means no baselines. And with respect to evaluation culture, I think that's a very difficult thing to build. The system I'm most familiar with for evaluation culture is the Canadian national level system, where I think it's been time and resources to really integrate that, and now it's just part of the part of the wallpaper. It's just the way that things are done. But I think many countries, that's going to be quite a long shift. And then maybe just to Josephine's question. So we don't typically work with networks of parliamentarians. Our partner ESCAP, so the UN Economic and Social Commission might do. We do a lot of regional work and we do the national work, but typically not with parliamentarians. Also, just to stay, maybe it's Asian thing, but we refer rather than carrot and stick to more like a magnet. So can we pull people towards the result that we want to get? Thank you.
Thank you. I can see. Yeah, Marceline, go ahead. And then I know that Ziad has burning. No? Not burning at all, but I mean, definitely to pick up on it. Go ahead, Marceline.
What, for my point of view, one of the accelerator. Okay, one of the accelerator. You know, we organized 3 sessions of the International Conference on Africa's Emergence. One of the lessons learned is that all the African countries, they have a good development plan. But what I call the drawback, or one of the weakness, is the operationalization of the National Development Plan through Africa. And one of the key challenges is impact assessment. We organize the VNA process for Cote d'Ivoire. One of the key lessons learned is a unique development strategy which integrates the SDGs. Somebody talked about the baseline. When the SDG was adopted in 2015, the timeline is 2030. Do we have a decennial development strategy within each country which take into account the timeline for achieving the SDGs? I think this is one of the critical and one of the key points we should draw attention. It is important for each country to have a decennial strategy plan from which we can derive a 5-year development plan with a view to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. I think this is very critical. We need to have an anchoring, a unique body, including all stakeholders with a view to work on synergy to achieve the SDGs. I think this is one of the points I want to point out. I think it's very important if we want to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you be able to share with us your rate of the progress?
Maybe 3. I don't know, 3.
Fair enough.
3. Let me not forget one of the key points. We talk about the importance of the civil society. If we have a development strategy which take into account the timeline of the SDGs, let's have a local development, also a local development plan at the grassroots level also. And for this, I think the civil society can play a critical role in raising awareness for embarking all the stakeholders for achieving the SDGs. One of the critical points is also the budgeting. We need to have, I think, my colleague from Cote d'Ivoire pointed out this issue. We can have good VNR, but we need to have good action plan with funding. I think this is one of the key points if we want to achieve.
Thank you so much. Ziad, what's your reflection on that?
I will abstain from giving a grade. No, because frankly, if we follow the debate and the discussion at the official level here, nobody is happy with the result. And everybody is saying that after 4 years, if we continue in the same way, we will not reach the goals in 2030. So it's not about grading, it's about being realistic and say that we are not on the track. This is one. But I want to add to this because the easiest way to go, it depends from what we are assessing. If we are assessing the VNR, I think that we did well because all the countries participated actively in writing the reports. And the reports, as we mentioned, are good. But it's not about VNR. It's about the implementation of what we had in the VNRs. This is one. The second point, is it about the goals or it is about the agenda? And there is a big difference because if we are assessing the goals, goal by goal, some countries are doing very well in certain goals, education, health, I don't know. But the trade-offs between the goals makes the agenda failing. Because he mentioned the contradiction between growth and climate, between growth and the consumption and production patterns, between there are a lot of between investment and decent work, between investment and gender issues. So let's be a little be realistic and say that it's not about the goals, it's about the holistic agenda. It is about the interlink between the different goals and which is not actually exist. Another point. Inequality was identified as one of the core challenges. We are not talking about poverty. We are not talking about unemployment. They are important. But most importantly, inequality. The mindset did not change. You are still in the same mindset of poverty, reduction, and unemployment, etc. And we didn't shift the paradigm to address really inequality, which is more about systemic challenges, macroeconomy, redistribution, etc. So that's why, back to this parliament. In democracies, parliaments, they have the role. So we don't need to look for the role of the parliaments because it is a democracy. Parliament are elected and they monitor the executive. But when you have lack of democracy, it's very difficult to talk about the real implementation because there is no accountability, there is no transparency, and most importantly, the lack of the participation of the local communities, which is very important for this. That's why, I mean, democracy at the national level, or at least democratic governance at the national level, is key. Democratic governance at the global level is key, and the intermediary, the regional level, is very important. Meanwhile, so this is my quick comment.
Would you, no? Okay.
About the baseline, sorry. About the baseline, unfortunately, we don't have baselines. But we can consider that the first cycle of VNRs can serve as a VNR.
Yep.
So from now on, if we will keep on doing the same process, if we don't reform the process and to improve the whole process, from now on we don't need VNRs anymore. We need real monitoring and assessment reports to see whether they were committed to what they presented in the first cycle, and then to hold them accountable for their commitments, whether they are committed or not. So the baseline can be used as the VNRs can be used as and here they are in a big trouble because they wrote something very nice in the VNR, so now they are committed to certain baselines which are very hard to maybe reach.
Saule, if you have quickly something, because I need to have another round also. Go ahead. Turn it on. Turn that one on. Oh, yeah.
Very quickly, maybe on the question about parliament, I just wanted to share this important, I think, experience we have in our region. Because network of parliaments, I think that one of the case we have this Eurasian Parliamentarian Forum, and I think that it's what we can discuss later, but from my perspective, it is very important to platform to discuss and move forward with on policy level with such type of platforms with involvement of parliament. And another thing what I want to mention is about accelerator and about how important prioritize and localize and how it's reflect how it's influent on ownership and in fact on achievement. So it is very important.
Thank you so much, Saule. I think a couple of questions. Okay, we have Eskadar and we have lady in the front. If you get me the Thank you so much, Mohammed.
Thank you, Kasim. My English is not very perfect, but I will try to speak and to share my ideas. I think I'm Aissa too. I come from West Africa, and I'm a member of the Senegalese Evaluation Association. I think as an evaluator, we must ask questions about our skills, our own skills,
yep.
Because we have a transformative agenda. We have principles like leave no one behind. we have principles like interconnection between SDGs. As evaluator, if we have this kind of things, do we have some skills? Do we have the skills for evaluate this kind of area? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Eskatar?
Thank you, Kasim. Pleasure to be here. My name is Eskadar Nega. I'm the head of evaluation of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you so much for the very interesting points. I've particularly noted the point reiterated a number of times by Mr. Samad that indeed the regional level is quite substantively important and will continue to be increasingly important in understanding the trade-offs and assessments. The panel this morning that was looking at financing the SDGs clearly showed that a number of our countries, particularly in the south, are off track. And that is clearly related to their capacity or the lack of capacity of implementation, and therefore the point made earlier, how we could talk about evaluation when the implementation itself is problematic. But maybe looking inward, I wanted to be a bit provocative and recalling some of the messages that we as the evaluation community had 4 years ago. I don't get a sense that the message in terms of awareness, of sensitization has changed. So I would love to hear a lot from the panelists in terms of our own community, taking stock of what has worked and what has not worked, how we adjust the message, how we make sure that indeed evaluation adds value to the process, because most of the assessments or statements that we made are pretty much the same than what we used to say 4 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think we have a final question from the gentleman on the side. But we're online. We're live.
It's a Swedish conflict prevention and peacebuilding organization. I have a question about, there's been a lot of discussion about the role of civil society, their function. But when you say civil society, what exactly do you mean? Because, of course, civil society itself is diverse. It's not homogenous. It's sometimes in competition. And my second question relatedly is, there's been a lot of discussion about grassroots. And what do you mean when you use this term grassroots? Who counts as grassroots?
Thank you so much. Let me turn back to the panelists, probably. I know that, I mean, if we start with the final question, then it's a huge debate and discussion. But let's address probably the evaluation capacity, the regional level. The key messages haven't been changed, obviously, because it seems that the situation has been changed. Any reactions from the panelists, and who want to attempt to reflect on that? Ziad?
Not on the first, because I'm not an evaluator. So
Yeah, on the last one, yeah.
But on the last, if you want.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not an evaluator myself, so I can't go into this technical debate and discussion. But I said something in the very beginning. It's not about skills, it's not about funding, it's about the political will. When the political will is there, everything will be easier to find. But back to the question of, civil society is diverse, and the diversity of civil society is enriching the debate and the discussion. And this is all about bringing the all sensitivities and the different tendencies and the different interests of the society on the table when we are discussing and adopting any kind of policy. So it's not taking into consideration the interest of one segment of the society, but it's taking into consideration, when we are talking about civil society, we are talking about NGOs, but not only NGOs. We are talking about certain social movement, women movements, we are talking about trade unions, etc. It's very important. And then the diversification of the agenda. If you are talking about the goals, 17 goals or 15 thematic goals, then you have different types. You have engagement in education, in health, in climate, in environment, in economy, in etc. So it's very important also to protect the diversity. The most important question is about grassroots. You know, when you are talking about sustainable development and you are there talking about sustainable development, it's very important. Sustainability means the inclusion of the community, the local communities mainly. And the local communities are not only recipients, they are supposed to be also part of the whole process of planning or the whole process of the implementation and then the evaluation and the monitoring. So that's why we don't have to forget also the importance of the grassroots. I guess you are an academic from Sweden, so you can understand what I'm saying. When you're talking about sustainable development means grassroots. Without grassroots, there's no sustainability at all.
Thank you so much, Ziad. Quickly, I know Gonzalo wants to jump in, but allow me to take Bernard's basically on the evaluation capacity from the region. I mean, you're doing some work with the governments and you're engaging with evaluators. Is there a need to have a shift, probably a transformation in the capacity to meet up with the transformation aspect of the agenda?
So I would try and tie in three things. My colleague mentioned the agenda, and then Asatum was asking about skills, and Eskadar about the evaluation adding value. And I think it's really about the evaluation of the agenda. I think there's, and you know, my interventions were about the deconstruction down to the indicator level. But when you try and look at the agenda as a whole, I think that's a very difficult evaluation issue to tackle. So I was quite taken a note from this from the back, which is from the Eval SDGs, yep, which is about evaluating the complexity of the 17 SDGs. So I think it's more focus like this on how do you get at evaluating the agenda given the interlinkages between the SDGs, the complexity, issues like no one left behind, and I don't necessarily think we're tackling that in evaluation capacity building.
Yeah. Gonzalo?
Yeah, I believe that we need sometimes different skills to evaluate the agenda. Many of us here, like Dorothy, Stefano, and all of you, we're trying to work on different ways of evaluating the agenda. It's not that easy because sometimes, it's quite easy just to say, well, if we're going to address these targets, then blah, 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 and then we evaluate things as usual. But the agenda is more complex. Yep. Of course, it is a political agenda. It's not a technical one. Yep. And therefore, we're finding somehow the technical processes there. One element is how to evaluate the interlinkage process. So that's, I think we believe we need new processes and new tools. And going to the civil society thing, from my point of view, I wonder if this is civil society, but what I'm trying to think about that process is what is the counterbalance of governments? And we need counterbalances of power on governments. We need civil society, we need academia challenging governments, yep, at least in democracies, because otherwise, if we don't challenge governments, then we'll be doing things as usual. Yep. So it will be very, very, it may be possible that if we don't challenge governments, countries may only make cosmetic things on the agenda. And it's quite easy to see that. So I'll give an example. In Mexico, the new government organized a huge event 2 weeks ago with all types of stakeholders in a big room, and they called that the SDG process, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if the government is going to organize that big event every year, they may say, we are addressing the SDG agenda because we're inviting so many people to talk every year. Or the process may be rather bureaucratic because you are only concerned on producing indicators for the UN. Yep. So therefore, or on indicators to capture from many ministries, and therefore it could be bureaucratic or cosmetic, and therefore with no results.
Thank you so much. I think the clock is ticking, and I'm quite conscious of your time. I'd like to thank the panelists for the time, for the reflections they've added to the table, and I'd like to thank you all for the again echoing that discussion. And allow me to share first of all extend an invitation to all of you to tonight's reception that will take place in the UNICEF office, the UNICEF building next door, basically on the ground floor. That would be what time? 6:30. At 6 o'clock?
6 or 6:30?
6. 6 o'clock. Everybody is invited there, and there will be surprises for some. Yeah, same seat, next building. And this is an opportunity also to share with you some of the initiatives that EvalPartners and the different networks have done. An e-learning course to support parliamentarian for Josephine and our colleagues who are interested in that. A series of insights and series of briefing notes that has been published with close collaboration with our partners, IAED. Finally, the Agenda 2020 that this is the guiding and the driving the guiding document for EvalPartners that hopefully we will have the time to reflect in order to integrate probably in new dimensions to meet up with the transformation in the new era. Thank you so much for the time and the effort, and I want to thank you all to extend huge thanks to our audience online that has been this panel has been live. Broadcasted live, and I'm pretty sure that hundreds and thousands of our membership and communities are attending, and thank you so much for that. Publications are on the corner. Feel free to pick up any, and thank you so much for seeing you at 6.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you, Kassem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
قاسم شو مبسوط مني؟
معلم